When it comes to emerging technologies, are you the type of person who eagerly embraces the latest tools, or are you more reluctant? Do you prefer to stick to your more tried and true methods? I'm curious to know what each of your perspectives are, but I'll ask you, Brittany, would you like to weigh in on that first?
I have to admit, I am often drawn to shiny new objects. Those gadgets just get me going. And there's that sense of excitement and potential and exploring new technologies. Julia, are you like me, or are you standing in line at the Apple store when they release the latest iPhone?
I have never waited in line for the latest and greatest. I certainly appreciate the allure of new technology, but I do sort of value the reliability and familiarity of the tools that I already know and trust. I don't know, change can be sometimes hard and overwhelming. What about you, Quincy? Where do you place yourself on that spectrum? Are you inclined to really embrace the cutting edge, or do you tend to lean toward that tried and true?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think my approach has varied over the years. I was one of the first folks lined up to try to get the infamous Google Glass, if you remember those, back about 10 years ago. I got them and I did nothing with them. I learned so much from that experience because there wasn't enough infrastructure to really do what I thought I was going to be able to do with those technologies. Those glasses, what ended up happening is I looked like a goofball walking around town with these glasses that most people didn't even notice, and a few did and give me funny looks. But how I sum up my approach now is that I don't like to be first, but I don't like to be third either when it comes to adopting new technology. So welcome, listeners. I'm your host, Quincy, and I'm joined here by my awesome TLC teammates, Julie and Brittany. Thank you for joining us today on the Talk, Listen, Collaborate podcast. This is the third episode in our series, Let's Have a Chat About ChatGPT. Today, we're excited for another thought-provoking discussion for you. I posed this first question to you, to each of Brittany and Julie, because it appears that ChatGPT is becoming increasingly accessible and advancing at an unprecedented pace. In fact, the data suggests that technology adoption in general is actually speeding up, according to Harvard Business Review. This is true across other sectors like household items such as cars, appliances, and even phones, but it's been truly astronomical for ChatGPT. And to put it in perspective, 1 million users is usually the gold standard for companies. If you have 1 million users, you're usually called the unicorn. To support my point, after launching in 1999, it took Netflix 3.5 years to reach 1 million users. That was a big deal back then. Comparatively, Facebook came along and it launched in 2004, and they reached that same benchmark in 10 months, right? That's considerably faster. But more recently, Instagram reached 1 million downloads in 2.5 months, which is even more remarkable. But get this, ChatGPT reached 1 million users in an astounding 5 days.
I can beat that. Meta has over 30 million in just a couple of days.
Wow.
I know. So, okay, this data represents the people who have moved towards those technologies, right? And I think we can all agree that this idea of adoption is actually more complex than maybe any of us have ever thought about. And while there may have been 1 million users within 5 days who rushed to be first, I think we also need to think about and acknowledge that there were people who were aware of it, but didn't give it a try within that time frame, right? And maybe even certainly some who have still not accessed the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that idea is actually really represented by the diffusion of innovation theory.
Ooh, tell us more about this theory, Julie.
So basically, it's a way to think about why new technology is important. And this framework informs how people move towards or away from it. The theory is actually not new, and it was developed by E.M. Rogers in 1962. Rogers was a communications theorist and sociologist, and he came up with this idea as a way to describe how new ideas spread throughout a community or a population. And in particular, the theory really seeks to capture the idea that adoption of an innovation, whether that's ideas, behaviors, or even products, it really doesn't happen instantaneously. And instead, it occurs through a process where some people are more eager to adopt the innovation and others are more resistant to change. Rogers actually plotted this idea of adoption along a bell curve or a standard curve, and he used this graph to describe groups amongst a population. Rogers called the first group innovators, and this minority of people are those who want to be the first to try out the brand new thing. And in general, this group is really quite interested in new ideas and is quite adventurous and really willing to take risks. This group often needs very little convincing to try out something new, and we might consider this group pioneers.
Can I tell you who I picture when I hear that description?
Yeah.
I think about these are the people who maybe already have their names on the wait list to go to Mars.
100%. They're top of that wait list, right? So the next group after these pioneers are called early adopters. This group often represents opinion leaders and are generally people who embrace opportunities for change. They're comfortable adopting new ideas, but they often benefit from a little bit of information about how to make that change possible. So things like tutorials and guidelines. We might think of this group as the influencers. They like adopting an idea and then sharing it with others.
Okay, so these people aren't waiting in line at Apple, but they're not paying the sales price. Do I have that right?
Yep. So the next group then really represents the majority of the population, but it's actually split in half between the early majority and the late majority. The early majority are not the first to rush something new, but they generally adopt it before the average person does. They often like to see a little bit of evidence that supports the idea before they're willing to make that change. So these are people who benefit from hearing testimonials or success stories that show evidence of a reason to make that change. And we might think of folks in this category as pragmatists.
These are our Google review readers, right?
Absolutely. And I think I fall into this category. The second half of that bigger group, as I mentioned, is called the late majority. And they tend to be a bit more skeptical about adopting technology. They tend to shy away from change and really only adopt the idea once it's been accepted and implemented by the majority of their community. They like to have greater access to information compared to the early majority and often factor in the number of individuals who've already embraced the concept before they choose whether they'll adopt it or not.
Okay, might these people be only willing to move to an electric car once they see charging stations everywhere?
Yes, I think that's right. And this last group is called the laggards. And while the term sounds a little bit negative, it's really not intended to be a judgment. Instead, it's meant to represent that members of this group are really just more conservative and comfortable with tradition. They tend to be change adverse. And so before they adopt a new idea, they might need statistics, but they also might need some pressure from the groups that have already adopted the innovation. These folks may only have moved to a smartphone because they couldn't replace their flip phone with their cellular provider.
That was so my grandmother. And no shade, grandma. I get it. I get it. Change is hard.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, it sounds like this diffusion of innovation theory explains how people adopt new technology. It also offers a clear framework for understanding people's different reaction to innovation. And maybe even helps me understand my own reaction better.
Yeah, that's a good point, Quincy. I think we're definitely seeing and hearing about all these reactions regarding ChatGPT, specifically in higher education settings. And these are important to consider. Another important question arises when we think about the attitudes towards innovation adoption. Even if our instructors themselves are unsure about where they might fall on that bell curve, they might recognize that their students have shifted towards the early adopters. And given that understanding, many educators are grappling with the idea of how to prepare our students for a workplace where they think AI will be prevalent. And it's crucial to acknowledge the importance for equipping our future practitioners to be ready and to thrive in a world that incorporates this type of technology. In fact, this notion of preparing our students for the integration of ChatGPT was a really big theme echoed by our panelists in the second episode of our series, which I think underscores the importance of addressing this topic in higher ed, don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're making a lot of sense to me. When thinking about the adoption or even the rejection of innovation, there's so many factors to consider, starting with the initial decision whether or not to adopt, as well as ending with the determination of whether or not to continue to use an innovation. In essence, while the diffusion of innovation theory presents a static or linear process, it sounds like people can actually move back and forth along the bell curve. That makes sense to me. As a result, I think it's very valuable to view the question to adopt or not to adopt as a cycle more accurately. And then there might be some key factors we might want to consider to help break that process down as we move from phase to phase. This process can become overwhelming, but I'd like to take a pass at distilling this process into 5 simple steps for adoption. Step 1, become familiar with the technology, right? You need to learn about it as best you can. Step 2 would be setting the objectives or goals for how you plan to use this. And then step 3 would be implement the technology. And step 4 would be assessing and iterating on how the technology is used. And then lastly, stay up to date on the latest and greatest news related to that new technology. To us, the TLC team, these steps are very important to be considered to efficiently adopt ChatGPT in our instructional practices. I'd like to take a minute, talk more about these 5 steps in more depth. Shall we?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. So as I mentioned before adopting, the first thing you want to do is familiarize ourselves with the technology. So let me ask you for a second here, when you think about adopting a new technology, maybe you've not even heard anything about it, how do you get started? What are some things that you ask yourself? And how do you know if you're ready to use it, even if it's on a small scale?
That's a good question. I think personally, I have to get my hands on it. Before I even begin to think about, how could I consider implementing it, I need to know firsthand, what do I like about it? What are the pros and the cons to this tool? I'm very likely watching tutorial videos. I'm reading some reviews so I can avoid some common mistakes, but ultimately playing around with it so I have a better understanding of what it can do. And then I can make an informed decision about how I might incorporate it or if I even want to.
Yeah, Brittany, I'd echo that. I do a lot of the same things. And particularly with ChatGPT, sometimes reading about it doesn't do it justice, right? Really kind of seeing how your questions get answered and the speed at which they get answered is really quite astounding. I also, as I kind of go through that process you were describing, something else I do is think about really how I'm feeling and asking whether I'm ready for it and if it's ready for me. And does it meet my goals and my interests? How are other people using it? And what might pros and cons be to making that transition to using something new?
Outstanding. So thinking specifically about ChatGPT, what are some ways you think people can get started familiarizing themselves with this technology when exploring whether or not to adopt it for educational purposes? Brittany?
Okay, that's a good question. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to refer our audience back to the very first few episodes of this series. Shameless but legitimate plug.
Good move.
The next suggestion I'm going to have is I'm going to tell you what I do. You need to get your hands on it. You need to gain hands-on experience. You need to explore the tool firsthand. Go pick a couple of YouTube videos. The tool has a very simple and user-friendly interface. And to Julie's point, simply reading about it, it won't provide you a complete sense of how it actually works and all the different ways that you can use it.
Julie, same question?
Well, I mean, Brittany knocked it out of the park, but I think something else is to think about how you don't have to adopt technology, ChatGPT in particular, everywhere for everything. But this technology really is coming towards us, and our students might be using it even if we're not. So I think that once you've had a chance to familiarize yourself with the tool, it might be a really good time to do a temperature check to see if you are feeling ready to adopt the technology, again, even in a small way. And if so, you might have some other questions, which is great. And if you're not ready to adopt, I think that's okay too. That's just an opportunity to kind of stay in this step and to continue to read and review and learning more, especially as this technology is so rapidly evolving.
Right on, Julie. It is changing by the moment. But let's just assume that you are ready to move forward and adopt this new technology. This next step is based on considering the how, when, and where you will use it. And we recommend establishing objectives or goals. We always say this in the TLC, and those listening today, you may have heard us say this. When it comes to designing new learning experiences, be intentional. So how can educators be intentional about adopting and implementing ChatGPT in their practice? Brittany?
Well, I think you said it, but I want to reiterate. So our objectives and our goals are set first, and we align whatever technology choices directly to those objectives and goals. And I swear I am a broken record when it comes to this, but we don't want to use technology just to use it. We want to look to see where it would bring value or address a gap or a learning problem that I'm seeing in my teaching. And then think about, how do we leverage that tool to get our students closer to those learning objectives? Or maybe we can help them do something better or more efficient. So I think we know that this tool is great for brainstorming. It's great for practice. It can give them feedback. So when we think about those pros, we might think about activities that specifically use those strengths and align them to the skills that we're trying to reinforce or improve upon in our students. So let's go through another example. If I want my students to be more creative, maybe I design an activity where they have to brainstorm with ChatGPT and their peers. Or maybe if I'm trying to implement more group discussions in my class and I'm short on time, we can turn to ChatGPT to help me get started with that task. Either way, we want to think about our goal and how technology can help us connect there and get there maybe better, faster.
I love that. Yeah, better, faster. I love that idea, Brittany. So what I'm hearing in your response is that we need to start small, perhaps pick a singular goal, maybe something that specific that students are struggling with, or a skill that you really want to help them develop. Then at the same time, it sounds like we need to be open to feedback and be flexible. I agree with both of those ideas. And then my advice is that you can always adjust and expand from there. Do you agree, Julie?
I really do. I think both you and Brittany bring up really great points that when we use technology, it should be balanced, practical, and sustainable. Just like I wouldn't redesign my course from top to bottom every single time I teach, I need to think about using this tool as a resource within the constraints that I have. And we know that time is a major factor. So the time that I'm talking about might be both the time spent on redesigning an activity, but also the time it takes for me or my learners to complete a task.
Got that, totally. What I'm also hearing here is that when we're thinking about adoption, we need to consider alignment of the goal to the situational factors.
Yes.
And be intentional about what it means to really jump in using this tool. I love that. For instance, adopting technology for educational purposes and not just for the technology's sake, it's helpful to think about a couple of questions such as, what skills or knowledge do we want our students to have about that technology? And what do they need to prepare to be fully engaged with that technology or the learning activity at the same time? And then another question is, what would the user experience look like, right? We need to think through that for our students, for our learners. What would be their concerns? What should we probably ask and not just assume that they might know, right?
Totally. I think that we know we're designing for our students, but it's okay to ask them too. How does this land? Is there anything I'm missing? I think that's a really important point. So let's think about the idea of thinking through the user experience for the next step. This is when you're ready to implement the technology. What are some key ideas here that can help us do that?
Gosh, it's all about communication for me. I really think it's crucial to communicate the desired outcomes when integrating the new technology such as ChatGPT, or any technology for that matter, when you're trying to do that in your classes and your instructional practice. By doing so, this is where you get the chance to set clear expectations for students, right? This is when you bring them together. Hey, we're doing this. We're going to use this technology. This is how I expect it to go. Guiding through this tool in particular will be super critical. There's a lot out there. We're still learning about this tool and how it could be used. Let me give you an example. For instance, one of my expectations is that students should have a clear understanding that ChatGPT should not be used to answer quiz or test questions per se, right? We don't want them to use this just to get to the answer for an assignment, just for the grade per se. Rather, this tool could be used for practice and to be able to refine the problem solving activities and skills that we want. We can give them a prompt or a scenario and give them room using this tool to analyze the content and expand on their foundational knowledge on the topic, right? Would you guys agree with that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Quincy, I'm tracking with what your expectation is here, but I'm curious how you've gone about that communication in practice. Can you think about a time where you've asked your students to use a new technology or a resource? And how have you gone about introducing that tool, or what verbiage have you used to really explain that purpose and those expectations?
Oh gosh, Julie, you're putting me on the spot here. I will tell you an example of technology, not ChatGPT, but another infamous technology that anyone who's worked with me will know, will be not surprised that I'm offering this software called PaperPile. In a research methods class I taught, I've introduced students to this cool reference management software called PaperPile. I'm a big proponent of it because it really automates a very tedious task of finding and formatting and embedding references in a manuscript or a research project paper. How I implemented this technology is I told the students in the class what the purpose of PaperPile is first. I gave them a short demonstration of how I use it so they can see for themselves, set the expectation that way. And then at the same time, my goal wasn't to overwhelm them by forcing them to master it. Instead, I merely wanted them to try it. And then I even encouraged them, even after trying it, they can use whatever tool they preferred.
Yeah. So as you're describing that, though, I did have to wonder, it sounds like this is really important to do, whether we're thinking about technology or really any classroom activity, right? I mean, active learning, polling, our assessments, no matter what, we really want to talk to our students about why we're asking them to do something and what we expect of them as they do it.
100%.
Yeah, this is all really great. I love it. We need to tell them what it is. We need to tell them why we're using it. But we also have a responsibility to teach them how to use it responsibly, right? But what does that look like in actual practice? And let me tell you, I asked this question for a specific reason. I've listened to so many podcasts and I have read so many articles, and they stop short of giving practical advice. They say things like, this is like a black box. We don't entirely know where it sources its information. There are some issues with it. It can be misleading. It can be biased, inaccurate. It sometimes hallucinates in really believable ways. And again, nothing else after that. They may say, go warn your students. Okay, but what's the best way to do that? What's our role as an educator in modeling and preparing our students to use this responsibly?
Well, Brittany, I sometimes hallucinate too, but I think I'm hearing this all the time. The conversations in circles is ChatGPT is going to kill education. It's going to, cap out on critical thinking skills, these type of things. This is on everyone's mind right now in all the circles that I'm listening to and paying attention to it at this time. I think this is what's been missing from these conversations, podcasts and articles. I'm dying to hear some practical examples of what to do, how to contend with these concerns, which I think are very appropriate and valid. So I've been spending some time thinking about this, and I'd like to offer a couple examples on how ChatGPT can maybe be used in a healthy, constructive way. This won't be an exhaustive list. I'm just toying with some of these ideas still. But here's a couple of examples that I like to offer that I think could help alleviate with this tension surrounding the potential use of or misuse of ChatGPT. For instance, ChatGPT can be used as a way that students can practice with a particular skill or develop knowledge around something. But I would say to reduce the chances of them just doing this for the sake of doing it is ask them to show their work, right? A lot of times, the things that we're asking them to do here at AT Still University, it are things that we want them to develop. We want them to formulate and connect to new concepts and develop and kind of flesh out their understanding of these concepts. Well, there's nothing wrong with ChatGPT in doing that and coming up with an answer, but ask them, hey, take a screenshot, share a screenshot, upload a screenshot for me. Show me what you're doing. What are your problems? What are your questions that you're asking? What do you feel about the response that the chat produced for you? And asking them to come up with that. And then how great would it be is then they could provide some support why they agree or don't agree, right? So now they're still critically thinking through this, even though the software is coming into a concrete answer for them that may or may not be correct due to the hallucination, right?
And Quincy, actually, ChatGPT just pushed an update that makes that easier than ever. You can actually share your results without having to take those screenshots now. So I think that even increases the opportunity for that transparency and that process that you've just been describing.
Fantastic news. See, this technology is getting better by the second for us. Another thing to think about too that jumps out at me as a practical example on how this technology can be used and complement what we want to accomplish in the classroom, in the clinic, in between in the hallways, is this idea of metacognition, helping your students think about their thinking, which we know is a really important, crucial part of the learning process. If you're interested in putting together a reflection activity, what about asking your students to think about the answers that they generated using ChatGPT? What about asking them was that they expect? What is it that surprised them? What would they do to modify them to make them their own? This would be a great opportunity. They could do this multiple times in a safe place, in a constructive way. I think this would be a great idea too.
Yeah, I love both of those ideas. I would also just add, I think that there's an opportunity as instructors to really model this by talking through our own use of ChatGPT. So, for example, I could interrogate, perhaps aloud, the results of my own interactions with the tool, right? Is the question I used the right question? Did I phrase it the right way? Does the answer make sense given my goals and the context that I gave ChatGPT? Do I need to update or modify the output in my own use? I think by showing some of that conversation almost that we're having with the tool, we can model how our students might do that in their own practice.
Such great advice and examples. I think what we're highlighting is it doesn't have to be super complicated. We can start small and we can see how it goes. So thank you for those suggestions. Julie, I had a question specifically for you. What recommendations might you have for a faculty member who might be anxious about one of their students feeling triggered or maybe even offended by a ChatGPT output during maybe one of their in-class or clinic activities?
Yeah, Brittany, I think this is a really important question. And actually, in grad school, I was a leader for a student-led diversity, equity, and inclusion group. And we hosted a lot of discussions and debriefs. And what we did is at the start of each of these sessions, we would review group norms and expectations for the conversation and how we would engage with one another. And as part of that, something that we did was to remind people that we can't guarantee a safe space. At the same time, we wanted to promote what we called a brave space for learning and for sharing. And what this really meant is that it's possible that someone in the room might say something that others found hurtful, even if this was done unintentionally. So we wanted to set those ground rules from the beginning about discourse and respectful conversation. And we use this framework called ouch and oops. And this is popular in the literature and in conversations around DEI. The idea here is that if someone said something that hurt, anyone was free to say ouch. And this can call attention to what was said without then putting the burden on the person who was hurt to explain what happened in that moment. Oops, then, was a way for someone to apologize if the intention of what was said didn't match the impact. Then as facilitators, we had an opportunity to address the situation or follow up later having done some research. And I bring this up because I think the same thing applies. There's a possibility of seeing something hurtful or offensive. We know that bias exists in our society and is present on the internet. And in fact, AI can actually enhance and accelerate what already exists in our culture. So my suggestion here would be to prepare your students with guidelines should they find something offensive while participating in one of your activities. For example, I might invite my students to speak with me to discuss what happened, and I really want to let them know that I value and validate their feelings and reactions. Additionally, I might have some opportunities or options for my learners to do this both in person or anonymously because they might feel uncomfortable sharing it in person. I think it's also valuable to be able to share ATSU resources with learners and then to be prepared to debrief with the class as a whole should something have occurred. So it's okay if we don't have all those answers right away in the moment, but I do think it's really critical to circle back and debrief as a class.
So what I liked about what you shared there is that you may not have the exact answer for 100 different things that could pop up, but you have a plan and your students know the plan kind of going into it. If something should happen, these are our guidelines. This is what we're going to do. I love that you shared that. Thank you for that. Now, what about privacy concerns? I know this has been all over the news, especially given that we are entrusted with a lot of personal health information. We have laws like FERPA to contend with. What do we think about this?
Yeah, Brittany, this is also a really important, but also hard question. I think that we're seeing recently big companies, even like Google, have updated policies around what's considered private and public data. And there are already concerns about how large language models like ChatGPT use inputs to continually train on. Simultaneously, we're learning about organizations, including the American Medical Association, expressing the need for guidance and regulation, particularly, as you mentioned, with the increasing use of the technology in healthcare environments. So I think it's valuable to remind ourselves and our learners what types of information should and should not be inputted into ChatGPT, and to really think about what constitutes private or protected information. I would really make this explicit, even if it seems obvious, because sometimes having those reminders can be really valuable as a stopgap or a check.
Yes, exactly. And I think most people might say, of course, they're not going to put patient Jane Doe into ChatGPT and get an exact diagnosis. Maybe best to remind them.
Right. Well, and I mean, it might not be that I would put Jane's name and birth date and age and weight, but what happens if I'm putting, comorbidities along with the presenting factors? Is that then private information? So I think it's important to have that conversation with your learners to help them really understand what is acceptable to put into ChatGPT and what do we really want to leave out.
All really good points. Okay. Are you ready? Guidelines and policies. The most exciting part of this episode. Am I right? It may not be the most thrilling part of our discussion, but this one seems to be one of the most talked about out there circulating. Now, we know that establishing guidelines and policies, it's essential for students to be able to use ChatGPT safely and effectively in our setting. And it becomes increasingly important as this technology grows, becomes more powerful, and our students begin to incorporate it more and more into their everyday practice. Now, when it comes to creating guidelines or policies for your course, Quincy, I'm curious, what format does this usually take, and where do you post your policies and guidelines?
Oh, great question. I think this is an important question, as you're alluding to, and adding humor, Brittany. Before anything, I would suggest start looking around at other departments like mine or near mine to see what they might have already developed. Maybe they have come up with some guidelines. Maybe there is even a department level policy out there for using ChatGPT. But I would avoid trying to reinvent the wheel. There might be other things out there.
That's a really good point. I'd also point out that, most people stop short of the syllabus, but you can reinforce your guidelines and policies and your announcements perhaps even in your assignment instructions or your discussion boards, wherever you think it's applicable. It doesn't just stop short of the syllabi.
Yes, Brittany, and to your point, sometimes I look at what other people have even written and use as a model for my own policies, rather than reinventing them. Reaching out to colleagues and other people, asking what's working, what hasn't worked as far as their guidelines. There might be some language that colleagues out there that have they could share that will resonate with you, and you can see if you can adopt it or adapt it for your own setting. For example, one of my favorite things that has caught my attention about this, especially for their language, is Dr. Holly Fernandez Lynch, a bioethics and law faculty member at the University of Penn. It's a great one to look at.
So, Quincy, I'm curious, what viewpoints or trends are you really starting to see in this space and in the language around guidelines specifically related to ChatGPT use?
Oh gosh, Julie, that's a big question. I've personally seen all run the gamut, from I'm all in, I'm teaching class in the ChatGPT cloud, which I don't think is a thing, to I don't want anything to do with this. This is gonna steal my thoughts and take over the universe. I feel like I've seen it all. And we've been contacted a couple of times here in the TLC asking for help with this, people trying to investigate how they can integrate it. I think we're at the early stages, but I think we're in a good place considering how new and how rapidly changing this whole thing is. I think we're in a healthy place to have a healthy approach to this ChatGPT and ChatGPT-like technology.
I would agree with that. I've heard everything from get away from me to I love it, but we can't forget that there are people who fall into that middle ground too. Those who want to use it, want to prepare their students, but maybe just want to adopt a simple and pragmatic responsible use policy. For example, if students use a chatbot or an AI tool to complete an assignment, they should be held accountable for verifying all of the information and the references it includes. And kind of drawing on the inspiration from the use of Wikipedia in medical education. This approach could help encourage critical evaluation and fact-checking while still allowing them to harness the power of AI. Kind of best of both worlds. You are responsible for what you submit.
Yeah, absolutely. Although hearing Wikipedia, I think I get some flashbacks to middle school and high school about being told never to click on Wikipedia. But to summarize what I think I'm hearing, as we go through this process, it can really be helpful to ask ourselves a few questions like, do my guidelines and expectations help my students understand the role of ChatGPT in their educational journey? And can they see the integration of how this tool aligns with my educational goals and objectives?
Yeah, I think that's right, Julie. The choice to integrate ChatGPT into our teaching practices can be really powerful, particularly for student engagement and for critical thinking, despite the grumblings, right? But all the while, I think it still requires some thoughtful consideration and some responsible guidelines on how to use it. As you said at the top here, Brittany, don't do it for the sake of doing it. Don't do it just to be to keep up with the times because you feel like you need to do it. Instead, be intentional for your students when considering implementing ChatGPT.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we've implemented our technology, we've done that intentionally, we've set our goals. I'm curious, as you're using it, what are you looking for? And I think the $1 million question is, how do you know if it's working for you or others who are using it with you?
Oh my goodness, that's an excellent question. Well, when evaluating new technology, it's important to consider whether it's meeting the needs and the goals we set above, remember? So we've set our goals. Did I reach my goals? Here are a few questions I might ask myself if I'm thinking through this practically. Do I enjoy using it? Does it enhance my productivity or does it streamline a workflow that I had intentionally set? Is it difficult to navigate or does it seemingly integrate into an existing process? I would also think about the effectiveness when I'm thinking about collaboration. So how does it impact others who are using it alongside me? Am I team teaching? Is it impacting my students in a negative or positive way? Does it facilitate smooth communication or collaboration? Or might it be creating unnecessary barriers?
Ooh, yeah, those are some really great questions. And Quincy, I'll ask you then next, what might continual assessment look like for you specifically related to ChatGPT?
I fall in love with that term, continual assessment process. I really like that phrase because it shouldn't be a one-time deal. I think it should be regular checking in, especially when you're doing something new, and could be startling, could be a little startling to your learners. There's a lot of pitfalls to overcome. I would say, gathering feedback both during and after the learning process. During the process, I might do one of my favorite things. You all taught me how to do this, is muddiest point, right? After a particular activity, and maybe you're doing the Chat GPT. Hey, what went well for you? What didn't go so well for you? And what might you do? What might we need to do together to make this a better learning experience, right? Our students don't always know what they supposed to know, but I think just checking in with them, giving them access, throughput to you to let you know how it was going for them. Take a look at looking out for anomalies. Hey, I wasn't able to get in. I wasn't able to access. Sometimes we know ChatGPT, everyone's on there and it kicks you out. Like it could be all these things that are disrupting it. Maybe they didn't have proper instructions, right? Now you can figure those things out and be really responsive by offering a muddiest point in a simple Google form. In a Canvas, they have a discussion board or even a quiz maker. And you could use the quiz feature to ask those questions. And then after, you might just ask the question, like it's a long semester, it's a long week, it's a long block. Hey, what went well? What could be improved upon? Let's see if this comes up. Let's see how it comes up. Hey, I didn't really get how you explained the goal at the beginning of it to use ChatGPT in this way. That didn't really land with me. Here's an opportunity to iterate the next time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on that. How do we iterate the next time around? And I think, it's a great opportunity to collect that feedback, but we also then need to think about how that really turns into that action plan. How do we iterate? How do we move forward? For example, from, the one use case of ChatGPT that we implemented and got feedback on, we might ask how we would iterate it. And do we want to continue building it out into our process? Maybe this is an opportunity to expand that use and to think about other goals or other learning challenges that it might fit too.
I love that you bring that up, Julie. Do I want to continue to use it? Do I need to make this subtle change? Or do I want to keep going with no changes? I think the important thing we need to keep remembering, because it just seems to be going so fast, is ChatGPT has not even been out a year. So I just want to give people that peace of mind. You have the right to change your mind. But just because maybe one small piece of the process broke down, let's try to identify where that piece is and can it easily be fixed without throwing out the entire tool?
Yeah.
And with that in mind, I also think that the part of iteration process that is important is continuing to stay current on advancements or updates with this technology. As I mentioned, it's moving rather quickly. And that brings us back to the beginning of the cycle because we need to continue to be familiar. We need to familiarize ourselves with the new versions, interfaces, or capabilities of this technology. So what kinds of resources are even out there for staying up to date on a technology that is moving this fast?
That's a really great question, Brittany. I think something that can be really helpful is continuing to check back with the developer's website itself as a source of continual information. Like you said, the updates and the evolution of this tool are moving at rapid pace. And so it can be really important to kind of keep going back to the source, because a blog or a post or something that's maintained by a third party might not get those updates as rapidly. So, something we can do is really going back to refer to the developers' websites and doing that both for ourselves and for our students. that can be really important to make sure that our students are always getting the most up-to-date information, particularly with interface changes or, like you said, capability changes. And that also can help make sure that we don't get a million emails, right? Asking, uh-oh, the button changed. What do I do now? So I think it can be helpful to refer back to the source, which in this case is the developers. But something else you might think about is following experts on social media who might be doing some of that for you and helping you understand what these technology updates or pushes even mean. Many of these folks have made it their career to keep up and share really digestible chunks of content and to help us understand how we can leverage the technology. So I think in short, my recommendation would be, go back to the source if you feel comfortable, but also who are those key opinion leaders, right? We talked about the curve of adoption. Who are those folks who are going to be ahead of that curve, who can let us know and help give us the information that we need to help inform our own practice and to share that with our students?
Excellent. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The idea that this technology is changing at breakneck speeds. I've said that term before when new software has come out. I was a big AR person. We've seen VR. Never have I seen anything like this in my 22 years on this planet. It is really changing. So staying up to date is super crucial. To recap here, I think this is a great time to wrap up and make some conclusions. We enjoyed having this discussion, but we started this conversation out talking about the innovation, how innovation diffuses through population, at the same time considering each person's diverse approach, acknowledging how people might take a different approach and have a different philosophy on technology adoption. We landed on these 5 major steps. Although we have made them our own, this cycle of technology adoption really isn't, it's based on what work that other people have done. We just kind of customized it for this particular technology, ChatGPT, which might have been, maybe one of the first times somebody has tried to approach this that you're hearing about. So talking about these steps, to wrap up, first, you have to familiarize yourself with the technology, understand its capabilities, understand what it can and cannot do, so that you can then appropriately design an activity that will meet your needs. And after you're ready to try it out, you familiarize yourself. Back to what Julie was saying, you feel good about it. Brittany said, you've poked around, you found some tutorials out there, you found some things that you really like that you want to try. Cool. Pick a purpose or a goal. Align this to something, have a target. Don't adopt it just for the sake of adopting it. Try to be intentional about how you plan to use it. And then from there, we go into the implementation phase where we try the technology out. In practice, you want to be assessing how it works, keeping an eye on those type of things, and then think about how to iterate to move forward to make it better if you plan on keep using it. And as Brittany just said, it's okay if it didn't work out. Be bold, be brave. We're here to help for sure. We'd love to hear from you and brainstorm through your ideas or even how it worked for you. For those of you that are already trying it, we want to hear from you and maybe we can be of help, just even a sounding board for you. But lastly, the last important step is to stay up to date. That technology is changing. Just during this conversation, I learned that you can share results, the prompts in the responses, just that easy. I'm playing with it as we speak here, as we're recording this episode, and I see it's just a couple of clicks and I could send this to the whole school. I promise I won't do that right here, right now. Oops, no, I didn't do it. We hope that we've shared this process with you that's practical, pragmatic, but also we've impressed upon you that this is really an active process. It's not just a set of check boxes. You need to explore each step, ask questions, think about what you're doing, and notice in yourself and in your students. Whew, that was a lot, right? What are your thoughts on the topic? I'm speaking to our listeners now. What are your thoughts on the topic? We would love to hear from you after listening to this podcast episode. Please feel free to join the conversation by replying on the YouTube channel here just below. Let us know you liked it, subscribe, and leave a comment for us. Let us know what your biggest takeaway was. And because this is a revolutionary, forever changing, constant change, let us know. Let's explore this together about what the challenges and the possibilities that you are thinking about when it comes to generative AI and considering implementing it into your educational practices. So grateful that you chose to listen to us today. Hopefully you got something out of it. We hope to offer you further programming in the near future. This is our third and final episode in the series. Let's have a chat about ChatGPT. I would love it if you took a moment to either email us or leave a comment about a topic or a educational challenge that you would like to see us address in one of the podcasts. We'd love to hear that. We're always looking for feedback on what we're doing to serve you. So thank you again for listening. We're looking forward to hearing from you. We will talk to you again. Julie, Brittany, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for the great conversation. And to our listeners, ciao for now.